This is the Ramana Maharshi Upadesa Saram satsang, a time to listen, reflect, and to deeply inquire into the self. Know yourself and be always free and at peace. Welcome. I'm Richard Clarke, hosting this satsang. I'm a seeker like you, sharing what we love. I've been blessed with years of deep teaching and practice that I bring to the satsang. This week I continue with Ramana Maharshi's text, Upadesa Saram, or the essence of instruction. I'll cover verses 16 through 22, in which Ramana deals with Jnana Yoga, or self-knowledge, leading to realization. I'm using Professor Swami translation. Now to Ramana's words. Verse 16. It is true wisdom for the mind to turn away from outer objects and behold its own effulgent form. Normally, the mind is aware of objects, external objects like a thing, or internal objects like a thought or sensation. This is consciousness of an object. There is an alternate way to use consciousness, which is consciousness without an object. Consciousness of consciousness, awareness of awareness. In consciousness of an object, the object is always illuminated by something else. With consciousness without an object, there is no external light. All the illumination, all the knowing shines from this consciousness itself. That's why it's called self-effulgent. It shines with its own light. What is the source of this light? Why, it is you. You are the light. The next verse, verse 17. When unceasingly the mind scans its own form, there is nothing of the kind. For everyone, this direct path is open. Buddhists talk about emptiness. This is what you find when you scan your own form, your own being existence. There is no form, only awareness. Every time you inquire, you use this awareness. When inquiry is deep, you see this awareness itself. Everyone has this awareness. Everyone is this awareness. Knowing this for yourself, about yourself, is liberation. Now the next verse, verse 18. Thoughts alone make up the mind, and of all thoughts, the I thought is the root. What is called mind is but the notion I. There is a lot to unpack in this verse. First, is the answer to the question, what is the mind? The answer is that the mind is just, as Ramana says, a bundle of thoughts. These are all thoughts about some thought object. Some thoughts are memories, some are anticipations, some are reflections on what is going on now. Some are the mental construct you take to be reality and the world. And all of these thoughts are in relation to this I thought, this idea of yourself as a separate individual. So all the thoughts and the I thought are intimately intertwined. The mind and the I thought are just different forms of the same imagined individual. They rise and fall together. The next verse, verse 19. When one turns within and searches whence this I thought arises, the shamed I vanishes, and wisdom's quest begins. Ramana turns to the heart of self-inquiry. Just where does this I thought come from? What is its source? You look around your existence. Is it from the body? No. The body is known, and I am the knower. Is it from the life force? Is it from the thoughts? Is it from the mind? Is it from the quiet peace of sleep? No, to all of these that are known. Where is this I? I can't find it anywhere, but it's still there. Verse 20. Where this I notion faded, now there is, as I arises as the one, the very self, the infinite. Finally, the false vanishes. It has no place to stand unless you provide the standing place. What remains is that which never comes or goes, the self, yourself, the only self that is. And you are that. This is consciousness. I, knowing itself. I. Ramana calls this I. Verse 21. Of the term I, the permanent import is that. Even even in deep sleep, where we have no sense of I, we do not cease to be. Reality is always. What within you is always. What comes and goes, and what is always there. Existence and consciousness are one and the same thing. What within you is not the known, and yet is always known. And the last verse today is body, senses, mind, breath, sleep, all insentient and unreal, cannot be I who am the real. What is real always. Who you are always. This is true in the waking state, the dream state, and deep dreamless sleep. Always you exist, with no exception. This is your experience at this instant. Can you find it? You know that you exist. You exist, and you know that you exist. And that is Ramana's verses on Jnana Yoga. Now let us listen to uh, some of the voices. First is Swami Adyasakti talking about these same verses.
Namaste, everybody. Hello once again, and welcome to the 6th episode of Upadesa Saram, which is going to talk about Jnana Yoga. Everybody pronounces it wrong, you know. Jnana Yoga. No, it's not Jnana. It's a kind of a mixture of G, J, and N. Jnana. Huh? You have to kind of make a face to say it. Anyway, most people get the understanding of Jnana Yoga wrong too. They think, or it's been, how should I say, misrepresented as a teaching of negation only, neti neti. And the things that are negated are usually considered to be the 5 sheaths, the different bodies, and we'll get into that towards the end, what they are. But the problem with that is, at the end, you're left with nothing. And that's not jnana. That's not real knowledge. Real knowledge is knowledge of the self, of the I, the real I, not the false I of the ego. So, in other words, there might be some negation along the way, but the actual practice is to focus on the real self. And then, once that's accomplished, one can go back and say, well, compared with this, the real self, then this is not it, and that's not it, and this other thing is not it, neti, neti, neti. See? The danger is that if one goes into the practice with a preconception, a preconceived notion of the things that one is going to negate, then it's no longer an experience, but it's just thinking. And in order to be effective, in order to lead to actual enlightenment, the practice has to be the experience of I, real I, Brahman, and not just the thinking aboutness. So anyway, let's go into the verses. The mind, knowing its own form of light, its true form of pure consciousness, the real self, having given up knowing external objects, alone is true knowledge. So what does this mean? We've also heard that Ramana said, when one is aware of the real self, he no longer perceives the external world. And certainly that is true in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. In Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the attention is entirely directed within to the non-dual, objectless, pure awareness of self, I. And because there is no attention being directed out toward the senses, the whole world just disappears. That's why it's called nirvikalpa. There's no vikalpa, no sense perception. But then after that comes savikalpa samadhi. Savikalpa means with sense perceptions, with vikalpas, but still samadhi. Now, what is that all about? That means that one perceives the so-called world and so-called objects as pure Brahman, pure consciousness, with an overlay, upadi. Upadi means a superimposition. Sometimes it's called a transformation, but that's not strictly correct, because Brahman never becomes transformed. Brahman always is just what it is, which is this objectless, non-dual, unconditioned awareness, bliss, pure enjoyment. There is no other. There's nothing to be aware of. But by the presence of Brahman, manifestation takes place. Just as by the presence of the sun in the sky, weather happens, plants grow, animals awaken and become active. Everything is going on under the light of the sun, but the sun isn't doing anything. The sun doesn't care. The sun is just there. Similarly, Brahman is just there, and by the presence of Brahman, everything else is happening. But Brahman doesn't care. Brahman is not involved. So in other words, he's looking out at the world and seeing only himself. This is I. This is savikalpa samadhi. This is the awareness of Brahman in the so-called world, which, as seen from that point of view, doesn't really exist. So, it's just a dream, folks. Merrily, 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 merrily. Life is just a dream. That's really the way it is. When the senses are withdrawn, or when the consciousness is withdrawn from the senses, then there's nothing to be seen. But then when the consciousness is again allowed to perceive the world from the viewpoint of I, real I, then everything is consciousness. Everything is existence, bliss. This has to be experienced, and it's just the most wonderful thing. When one scrutinizes the form of the mind without forgetfulness, without pramada or slackness of attention, it will be found that there is no such thing as mind. This is the direct path for all. So, if the mind is non-existent, then how can we scrutinize it? This is one of those wonderful paradoxes about spiritual life and consciousness. That in the beginning, when we're in conditioned consciousness, we see thought after thought after thought, like the images in a video or a moving picture. And this gives us the illusion that there's a continuous existence of I as an ego, I as a being in the world. But actually, there are only thoughts. And thoughts, of course, are made up of syllogisms, of words and symbols. And so because of all this, we think that there is a real world out there with objects and actions and karma and all the rest. It all comes from this fundamental misunderstanding of the relationship between Brahman or consciousness and thoughts. So how do we get past this illusion? Well, we scrutinize the root thought. The form of the mind is of the nature I am. I am is the root thought in the mind. So when we scrutinize this thought, and especially trace it back to its origin, not as a process of thinking, but as a direct experience, that is when we become aware of the truth. And of course, this can't be explained in words exactly, but the method to achieving it can. And so by doing this method of vichara, self-inquiry, inquiry into what am I, who am I, where does I come from, how are these thoughts arising in the mind, and follow them back to their source of arising, then we discover something wonderful. I wish I could explain it, but I can't. You just have to try it for yourself. And that's what this is all about. That's what all the sages are trying to convince us to do. So now an important point is that this process of self-inquiry has to be done without pramada, without loss of concentration, or without becoming deviated from the path, the intention of the method. And so somebody I know is going to ask, how do you do that? Well, how do you roller skate? Or how do you take a breath? Or how do you swallow and digest your food? Huh? Without biting your tongue or your cheek or something. You do it through practice. You learn to do it. It's a knack, like riding a bicycle or roller skating. It's a skill, like a muscle skill. This attention on the process of inquiry into who am I is like a muscle. It can be trained. And of course, the advantage over Raja Yoga is that Raja Yoga is more or less of a mechanical system. Raja Yoga, we discussed last time, is based on suspension of the breath, usually suspension of the breath in the outward mode. When we think of holding our breath, we think of inhaling and then holding it. But in meditation, the opposite is true. We exhale and then just allow the breath to stop. And of course, there are yogic methods like Kumbhaka and like that. But those are extreme. There are some dangers associated with it. The best way is to just gently allow the breath to relax. But even so, it's a mechanical method. It's dependent on this process of breath control. And we don't want to be dependent on anything external. We only want to use pure consciousness. And then the whole thing becomes on a whole different platform, unconditional awareness. Unconditioned awareness means it's independent of any external process or any method that depends on something outside. So even the mind is considered to be external, because the thoughts that are generated are simply symbols, simply words and syntax. So they're not real. Yet, how many people base their whole lives on piling up all these constructions of words and symbols? I mean, it's just astonishing. After you do a little bit of this vichara method, and then you go out and you look at the world, or you just look at the way you used to be, it's like, how could I live like that? How could I be like that? How could I invest so much care in words? And yet the whole world is running simply by words. It's really kind of scary, the depth of the ignorance in which people are sunk. So The best thing we can do for the world is to wake ourselves up, is to transcend this world of the mind and words ourselves. By doing that, then we begin to experience the reality, unconditioned consciousness, real I, real self, which is, of course, eternal, unconditional, non-dual, and so forth. So then, the next verse talks about what is that actual reality. The mind is only the multitude of thoughts. Of all these thoughts, the thought I, the feeling I am the body, alone is the root. What is called mind is this root thought I. So if we actually observe our thoughts, we find there is no mind, actually. Mind is just a collection. I think of it as a bucket full of thoughts. That's all it is. It has no objective existence. Thoughts can be said to exist because we perceive them. At least there's that much existence. But if you look into it, there is no perception of mind. There's just thoughts and thoughts and thoughts and thoughts, nonstop, day and night, except during deep sleep. Otherwise, thoughts are going all the time. And these thoughts condition our consciousness. They create like a screen or like colored glasses. And we look at our experience through that screen. And what we see is conditioned by the screen. We talked last time about when somebody is in love, the whole world looks different. Or when someone is depressed or in a state of loss, the whole world looks very different. So that is only a conditioning due to thoughts, due to believing in the existence of certain thoughts as real. But when we trace those thoughts back to the origin, which is a feeling, I am the body. And then we separate the feeling I am from the feeling of the body. And we see I am is nothing but consciousness. I am is pure consciousness. And of course, pure consciousness has all these attributes that matter or even thoughts don't have, such as being objectless, being self-manifested, unconditioned, independent, and so on. In fact, consciousness is the only thing that is fully independent. It doesn't depend on any other thing for its existence. That's why consciousness is Brahman, the Supreme. So we can experience this directly simply by separating this thought I am from the feeling of the body and tracing it back to its origin. That's the important thing. So this is stated in verse 2 of the Atma Vidya Kirtanam, a wonderful song written by Bhagwan. The thought, this fleshy body alone is I, is indeed the one thread on which the various other thoughts are strung. Therefore, if one goes within by keenly scrutinizing who am I, and what is the place from which I arise, the thoughts will all perish along with their root, the thought, I am the body. And self-knowledge will spontaneously shine forth within the cave of the heart as I. This state of self-knowledge alone is silence, Mona, the one non-dual space of existence, consciousness, the abode of bliss. And then comes the refrain in the Kirtana. Therefore, so very easy is the science of self. Ah, so very easy. Well, of course, in the beginning, it's not so easy because we're conditioned, right? But when we actually trace back this feeling of I am the body, and then separate out I am from the body feeling, and look at the source of its arising, that is an experience of a different order. And this is how Bhagwan defines silence. Not simply that the chatter of the mind is quiet, but that we are also aware of the origin of the thoughts, beginning with I am. Not I am this, I am that, I am the body, I am so and so, etc. Just I am. And this is the difference, again, between the Raja Yoga and this Atma Vichara. That in Raja Yoga, we use a mechanical process to temporarily silence the mind, and with an effort of will to attain a state of samadhi. But that state is just temporary. However, with Atma Vichara, self-inquiry, then it's not an effort of will, it's not mechanical anymore. But with one's very being, one goes to the root of consciousness and says, I am. And this is unconditional. This consciousness is present even during deep sleep. This consciousness is eternal, unconditioned. So this is the real self. This self can be, or the awareness of this real self can be maintained even during all kinds of action, even during all kinds of thinking. If one is simply aware of the distinction between I am and everything else. That I am is the Brahman, is the consciousness, the root of existence. Everything else is a predicate. Everything else comes after that. So, because it's not a mechanical process, it can't be broken. All we have to do is will it. That's the secret of enlightenment. That's why he says it's so very easy. Not so easy in the beginning, but as it becomes a habit, a practice that's more or less automatic, then you're off the runway, you're flying. Now it's also important to note what enlightenment, or what this Atma Vichara is not. And there are 5 things given. This is given in Maharshi's Gospel, Book 1 by Sadhu Om. Getting. It's not a process of getting. The self is always there. You have only to remove the veil obstructing the revelation of the self. And it's not retaining either. Once you realize the self, it becomes your direct and immediate experience. It is never lost, because we are the self at all times. Extending, it's not extending either. There's no extending of the self, for it is as ever, without contraction or expansion. The Absolute cannot expand or contract. There's no place for it to expand to. It's already everything. Retirement. This is not retirement. This is not renunciation either. Abiding of the self in solitude. Because there is nothing alien to the self. Retirement must be from some place or state to another. There is neither the one nor the other apart from the self. All being the self, retirement is impossible and inconceivable, even when Bhagwan was about to leave his body. And all of his devotees were crying, oh, don't leave us, Bhagwan. He was saying, where can I go? I'm not going to leave. There isn't anywhere to go. I'm here. That's it. And finally, abhyasa, or practice. It's not really a practice in the sense of like setting aside a certain time of the day to do Atma Vichara, and then the rest of the day we're sunk in illusion. No, it's not a practice in that sense, but it's a way of life. the practice, any practice, is only the prevention of disturbance to the inherent peace. You are always in your natural state, whether you do abhyasa or not. To remain as you are, without question or doubt, is your natural state. Sometimes still people ask, how do you do it? How do you become aware of your natural state? Well, we just recently did a whole series on the Ribhu Gita. The Ribhu Gita is simply a relentless barrage of shlokas, one after the other, about what it means to be in one's natural state. So if you want more explanation of that, or even better, if you want to experience it for yourself, then I recommend downloading the audios from SoundCloud. There's a link on each one of the Ribhu Gita videos. And put it on your player and just play them in sequence like an album over and over again. And within a couple of days, you'll experience something. Definitely. The next verse. When one scrutinizes within, what is the rising place of I? The I will die. This is self-inquiry, jnana vichara. So we talked about this last time and earlier in this episode, that the thought I, and I am, is a special thought, different from all others, because it is the root thought. Once you see where that's coming from, the whole rest of the thoughts simply collapse. In the place where the mind or ego merges, the one existence consciousness appears spontaneously as I, or I am I. That itself is the whole, Purna. So sometimes the Rasta people say I and I. It's the same concept, I am I. I and God are one within the heart. So, because everything is God anyway, everything is Brahman, then I am also Brahman. Once I become convinced of this, all these doubts go away. And that's the real existence, which has always been there. But because we listened to some thoughts, some words that came from outside, we began to doubt. And we lost our oneness, we lost our integral connection with the self. So now we simply have to get it back. It's just there, it's waiting for us. So now, these ideas expressed in the last two verses are also expressed in the Ulladu Narpadu. On reaching the heart, the I subsides and the real I manifests in its place. So as soon as we follow this thought of I am to its root, then the real I manifests spontaneously. We don't have to do anything. All we have to do is get rid of the false thought, I am the body. So I'm going to read the last two verses and finish up. That I, the whole, is always the import of the word I, because of the absence of our non-existence, even in sleep, which is devoid of the thought I, the mind. So in sleep, we don't have a mind, and we're not thinking I this, I that, but we're still conscious, and that's the real I. Only in that state we're covered with ignorance, so we're not aware of it. Next verse. Since the body, mind, intellect, breath, and the darkness of ignorance which remains in sleep are all insentient, jada, and unreal, asat. They are not I, which is the reality, sat. So this is the real meaning of neti neti. Once you know the real self, as I, spontaneously manifest in the heart upon relinquishing the false self, then it becomes immediately obvious, without any special training or practice, that the 5 sheaths are not I. And what are the 5 sheaths? The Panchakosha, the physical body, Annamaya Kosha, the breath or life force, Pranamaya Kosha, the mind, Manomaya Kosha, the intellect, Vijnanamaya Kosha, and the darkness of ignorance, Anandamaya Kosha, which is experienced in sleep due to the disappearance of the other 4 sheaths. So that's why sleep is something so beloved by all. That a good night's sleep is considered just the most wonderful enjoyment of all. And really it is. So, because Bhagwan did not want us to be deceived or self-deceived by thinking that if we simply intellectually analyze and reject these 5 sheaths, we will come to the real I. He left this verse until the last in the section to encourage us to realize the real I first, and then coming out of the Nirvikalpa Samadhi into the Savikalpa Samadhi, we will not be fooled, we will not doubt, and we will not mistake any of the 5 sheaths for the real self. So please practice this, experience it for yourself, and get the benefit. Om Tat Sat, Om Harihi Om.
And now, Nome with a discourse always.
That which you truly are, you are always. Not only is that immutable, it is eternal. What of you is eternal? What has a beginning and an end, a birth and a death, cannot be your very existence. For existence does not cease to exist at any time. Evidently, that cannot be the body, which has a beginning and an end. If your real nature is bodiless, what is it? What has a beginning and an end? In other words, that which is not eternal is merely a false appearance and not the reality of your being. Who are you? Thought is not eternal. It is momentary. What you are is always. If you are neither the perceptible nor the conceivable, what are you? The Upanishads declare that the self is Brahman. And Sri Bhagavan, Ribhu, Adi Shankara, and others have proclaimed the nature of the self to be Satchidananda, being consciousness bliss. If you know yourself, therefore, Brahman knows Brahman, God knows God. To know yourself, inquire deeply within. At the depth of your very existence, who am I? Such inquiry brings a cessation to the imaginary conception of differentiation, such as Jagat Jiva Para, the universe, the individual, and the supreme. In the eternal, as the eternal, one finds complete peace and illimitable joy. Such are of your very nature. If you mistake yourself to be a limited embodied individual, then with such misidentification, bondage seems to be, and being bound, the innate happiness appears veiled, and such is a state of suffering. To be free of the suffering, liberate yourself from bondage. To become unbound, cease to misidentify. To cease to misidentify, inquire, who am I? As all forms are seen to perish, the eternal must be formless. Your very existence is formless. What is formless cannot possibly be multiple. Differentiation is only among imagined forms. Thus, if you have a form, or seem to have a form, likewise God and the world. If you are the eternal, pure existence, consciousness, bliss, there is no question of form or of differentiation. There is only one homogeneous, boundless, beginningless, endless, pure existence. And that is what you are. The self is only one. Your existence is invariably singular. There cannot be two selves, an eternal one and a transient one. A real self and a false self. An absolute self, or Brahman, and an individualized self. If you inquire to know yourself, penetrating the very heart of the apparently individualized existence, you will find only Brahman, the Absolute Self, which is one without a second, for all eternity. The interior, silent, direct experience of this, without cessation, is steady abidance, or true knowledge.
All right, we'll take a few moments now for a little meditation, self-inquiry. Breathe in and breathe out with long, slow breaths. Feel the breath as it comes in, then as it goes out. Feel your mind quiet. You exist, and you know that you exist without feeling it or thinking about it. You just know. Already this is beyond body, feeling, or mental thought. Now we're going to inquire, what is the known? What is it that you know about? And who is the knower? You must be closer to the knower than the known. All the known keeps changing. The knower doesn't change. Now, what is always there? And what just comes and goes? Do you come and go? You are always. Who am I? What is the nature of my existence? All right, let's close with a short chant. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om. Peace, peace, peace. All right. Any questions or comments about this satsang? then just stay absorbed in it. And thank you. Namaste. And we'll see you next time.